It seems that this year there's a lot more teams that are sellers than we've seen in previous years, right?
Yeah.
You've got Coyotes, Philly, Montreal. Who else is in that?
Everyone who's not in the playoffs in the West, right?
Right. Yes,
everybody.
exactly.
Everybody.
Yeah, Seattle potentially.
In the East. I'm sorry. I meant in the East.
Because there's the disparity.
The playoffs in the East are. Yeah. We know who's making the playoffs. Right. We don't know who's going to be playing whom and what seed they're going to finish.
Yeah.
But the 8 playoff teams that are there now are going to be the 8 playoff teams.
Right. So it's just interesting because normally we see 1 or 2 sellers. Like last year, it was like, we thought that we had 2. We thought that Nashville was going to be a seller, and then at the last minute they said nope, and then we had basically 1 seller in the league last year. So is this going to finally be a buyer's market?
I think it might be. What is interesting to me is there's not a lot going on. What are we? How many days are we out? We're less than 2 weeks out.
We're less than 2 weeks out.
12 days out.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot going on in terms of imminent trades. And now that I said that, as soon as this podcast comes out, the second it comes out, there's going to be a blockbuster.
Yeah.
But usually leading up, there seems to be...
So we have you to thank for the upcoming blockbuster.
Yes. There seems to be more activity, earlier on. Like teams seem to want to get their business done a little earlier. And I guess a lot of that is because teams are cap strapped and they don't want to take on $1 that they don't have to take on before they have to take it on.
Yeah.
So I guess that must be part of it too. But I think you're right. I mean, there's a demarcation point this year, right? We've got everybody, 8 teams in the East are presumably in a position to sell. Whether or not they sell, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But they're in a position to sell because they're not making the playoffs. Yeah. We know that. We know that the New York Islanders aren't making the playoffs. We know that, the Ottawa Senators, the Detroit Red Wings, the Montreal Canadiens, we know, there's no chance.
Yeah.
Even if Montreal wins every game the rest of the year, they finish with, I think, 89 points, which won't be enough to make the playoffs. So we know that. So there's now suddenly there's 8 teams out there that are looking to move assets to get futures, right?
Yeah.
And then in the West, you've got some teams battling it out for the last spot. Is it going to be Dallas? Is it going to be, who's it going to be, right? Is it going to be Edmonton? That's basically it at this point, right?
Yeah.
And then almost certainly Winnipeg's not making the playoffs. There's a pretty big demarcation point there too. So now, is Winnipeg selling on Andrew Kopp? Is Winnipeg, so now then that pool becomes bigger. So I think you're onto something there, young man. I think you're onto something.
Well, mark the calendar because this is the first time I've been onto something on this podcast, I'd say. Yeah. Since I had the idea of the podcast.
Right.
That is, right?
That was a really good idea.
You like the idea of putting you front and center in a podcast format. Yeah, okay. I can see why you'd like that.
But do you remember our first meeting?
I do.
And I said, how much is this going to cost me? And you were like, no, you don't understand. And I didn't.
You're the interesting one. That's what you don't seem to understand here. Yeah, I do remember that. That still gives me a chuckle.
That was pretty funny.
I think, to your point, about all the sellers, okay, here's the TSN trade bait board, right?
Right.
I feel like the prices just have to come down because if you're inquiring on Ben Sherratt, you're like, hey, Montreal, I want Ben Sherratt. Ben Sherratt is... Maybe the TSN trade bait board is not the best because he's listed as a right defenseman. He's a left.
Yeah.
But that's all right.
And he's second on their board right now.
Third on their board right now.
After Giroux and Chychrun. Chychrun, yeah.
But if you're in Montreal, they say that they want a first and a fourth or a first and a prospect, right? Because they want the same deal as David Savard, right? That Tampa gave for him last year at the deadline. But if you're a team, you're going, hey, Kent... I mean, I'm just taking a quick cursory glance at the board here. Yeah. And I could also go for
Justin
Jacob Chychrun, John Klingberg, Mark Giordano, Colin Miller, Hampus Lindholm,
Justin Braun,
Nick Leddy. We talked about Rasmus Ristolainen. And I mean, okay, great. Ben Sherratt went to the playoffs last year. Went to the Stanley Cup final last year. Okay, great. He's a big, strong guy. But at the same time... you know what I mean?
You're not going to see teams give up that for these guys. You're not going to see a team give up what the Leafs gave up for Nick Foligno.
Yeah.
And it's all
also first and a fourth.
Yeah, first and fourth. So it's To me, like I said, at the trade market too, it's like hockey players are like real estate. Yeah. They're only worth what someone deems them to be worth. So just because last year Montreal got, whatever for David Savard.
Tampa.
Tampa got whatever for David Savard.
And now he's on Montreal. I know it's confusing.
Wait a minute. Yeah.
He was a rental for Tampa last year.
Yes.
And then
now
Montreal said, well, you guys beat us, and it's probably because of David Savard and David Savard alone.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, that was the reason.
But just because the prices that were established last year, it doesn't carry over to this year, right?
Right.
It all depends on supply and demand. And what we just talked about was the supply may very well exceed the demand.
Yeah. I mean, I just went down the list even some more. And you've got Luke Shen, Niels Lundqvist, Ristolainen we talked about. Calvin DeHaan would be an interesting pickup as well.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of good middle pairing defensemen, which that's what Ben Sherrod is. And one could even argue whether good applies to it.
Yeah.
But, he's a middle pairing defenseman, and there's a lot of good middle pairing defensemen on this list.
Yep.
And some top pairing defensemen. So, yeah, you got to think that this might shape up to be probably the first seller's market that I can remember in a very long time with the parity in the NHL that we've seen.
Yeah, I don't remember from one year to the next, so I wouldn't be able to tell you when the last seller's market was. But
I'm surprised you remember that first meeting we had for the podcast.
I do, yes. but I might forget it by next week. No, I think you're right. There's just, now that you sort of bring that up, there's really seems to be a lot of teams out there looking to unload guys.
Yeah.
And so what does that create? Then you move closer and closer to the deadline.
Yeah.
Does that mean that teams get more desperate to buy or more desperate to sell? Because, theoretically, you can go to the trade deadline and say, well, we want to do this and we want to add this, but if we don't, it's not the end of the world. Whereas, a team that's selling is going, we can't let this guy walk for nothing.
Never re-signing him.
Like Anaheim can't let their guys, Lindholm and Raquel and those guys, they can't let those guys walk for nothing.
Yeah.
So they may be in a spot where it's like, it's the day of the deadline and nobody's giving us what we want. So let's adjust our expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and especially for committed rebuilding teams where there's no way that, actually I've heard the rumor probably on 32 Thoughts where Philly is trying to re-sign Ristolainen. I'm kind of just like, why?
Yeah.
But, there's no way that that's a huge priority to them. And if you can't make it happen by the deadline, you just got to take what you can get.
Yeah, exactly.
And, if you're Montreal, you signed Sherrod as a free agent 2 or 3 years ago. And so,
he didn't cost you anything.
Yeah. And so whatever you get is just kind of gravy.
Yeah. And he contributed a fair bit.
He did.
Contributed quite a bit.
To all my joking, he did contribute a lot.